Hello, welcome to this series on building apps that scale. So this is something that I'm building for a few developers that I know, some that I know better than others. And basically the idea is I want to teach lessons in the context of thinking this is for somebody who would eventually work on my team. And so I figured I might build this for them and then just release this video to the world. So anybody who's interested, who wants to try and poke holes in my methodology or really likes my methodology and then wants to contact me and, learn a little bit more, that's kind of the point of this series. And the goal is I've spoken to 3 developers and I'm going to build this series, talk about my process for building web applications so that we're all on the same page with how the apps are built. And then we're actually going to all build a library app together. And the kind of big vision, the dream is to be able to just go meet a client, figure out what that client wants, and then on the way home, scaffold out in an app, which I'm going to show you later on in this video, scaffold out the data structure for that application. And then when we get home, basically that scaffolded out application will automatically generate a bunch of files for us and we can build the app really, really quickly using the user's computer as the database rather than a real database. So if you don't understand anything I just said then, that's totally fine. We're going to dive right in. And this first video is basically going to take you through an entire process of mapping out an idea, and then taking that idea and then figuring out what the components will be for that idea. And this doesn't have to be set in stone, but just getting a basic idea of what the components are going to be and then actually building out that application. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now we're going to be building a pros and cons app. My girlfriend and I are looking at buying a house and we're writing a pros and cons list of, reasons we may or may not want to get this house. So I figured, hey, it'd be really cool to build something that we would actually use in the real world. All right, so this is going to be super simple. The point of this video isn't to build something fancy. It's about the process. Okay, so first of all, usually when I'm using Miro, this is what I use to whiteboard everything. I choose frame, and then I just choose browser. And then I name it the name of the route. So the first thing I want to have is lists. And I'm imagining we'll have lists and then we'll also have pros and cons inside of that list. That's pretty much going to be the extent of this application. So there's going to be a table inside of here. So let's go ahead and build a big square here for the table. And that's going to be the pros and cons list. And then it's going to have some things like a title. And you might want to do cards for this in the real world. But tables are usually a good starting point. I find I'm slowly beginning to realize that it's better to just start with tables and then figure out different ways of presenting that data rather than always just because I find that I naturally get tired of tables and start trying to find different design choices that actually end up being worse than using a table at the end of the day. So we're going to do everything in tables. And if you want later on, you can change them to cards or whatever. And the architecture that we're going to use here is going to make it easy to do that. So we'll have a title, we'll have a color, and that'll give me an opportunity to show you how we might use different table slots. And then we're going to have here number of pros, so we'll be able to count related data. So this list is going to have pros and cons, and this will be the number of pros in that list. And then inside of here, we'll have number of cons. And another thing I might add on there is the ratio of pros to cons. I'm not sure exactly how I'll present that, so let's just whack it in there for now. I might just call it ratio. And then I'll also add here update and delete. So we want to have buttons for updating and deleting. So this is mostly just a way for me to show you very basically how we build out these common patterns that you'll often see and how we do it in a way that it's easy to scale in the future and how to do it in a way where we maintain cognitive overhead. We make it easy to continuously add things without having files that get really, really long. Okay, so let's add a title to this. I might actually just grab all of these here. If I hold shift and select all of those, I'll just bring that down a bit. And let's give it a title of pros and cons lists. That'll do. Okay. And we'll have a create button as well. So let's come down here and say, I think in the wireframe, they got a bunch of buttons. Yeah, here we go. Just a solid button. And I'll probably just make this a circle with a plus on it. Nothing has to be perfect for now. Okay, so that's that part of it. Next, we want to make it so that when we click on this, it shows a dialog where we can then go ahead and create something. So let's close out of that, and we'll have a dialog here, and we'll give it a title of create pros / cons list. Yeah, that'll do. Cons list. There we go. I'll go to my wireframe library. Oh, I think we got an icon library. Yeah, here we go. And we can just look for a close button or maybe a cross. Actually, you can see one down here. That'll do. So I'll drag that in there. And we go. Usually I probably wouldn't even bother with this, but we'll do that for now. And then we've actually got the form, which will have a title and the color as well. So let's come in here, and under wireframe, we can just do an import. I basically don't care about design at all at this point. It's basically layout. So technically, I guess layout is part of design, but as long as things are in the right place, everything is using Quasar at the end of the day. If I want to design things and make them look better, it's going to be easy to do that later on. So we've got our title here. And then under that, I'm going to have a color picker. I might just do a square for that and just say color picker, and I'll know what that means. Cool. Now we'll just do a little line that shows that when you click on the create button, that comes up. So now I'll come over here. Let's go wireframe again, browser, and let's make it so that when you actually select one of the items in the pros and cons list, it then takes you to a page which would be, we won't use slugs for now. We'll just go list / list ID. So that'll be the route for that. And then of course, later on you might want to have a really nice slug name here. So it might be like list slug instead. But we'll go with list ID for now. Let's go ahead and create a table for that. And it's pretty much just going to have a description and then an importance out of 10. I wanted to put kind of like a bit of a weighting to it and say, for example, this is a 6 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 of importance to us. I don't know if you actually do that in the real world. Usually, maybe you probably use your instincts, but I don't know. This could be fun to build. So here, I'm just going to denote that this is going to be a variable, which will be the title of the list. So the title of this table will be the title of the list. And then we'll just whack in there a description of the thing. Maybe we'll align that to the left. And then how about over here we have the importance out of 10. All right, that'll do. Now let's drag that over here like that. And then we want to create pro button and a create con button. So I think I might just do some floating action buttons for that. Oops, that chip looks like a button. So let's just do 2 of these. And how about just create pro, and then we'll call this one create con. So this is something that you would do with the client, or maybe at first you would just talk through the client's needs and you'd do this yourself. But preferably you could do this, maybe not even the client, somebody who would actually be using the app. Ideally, you're mapping through this process with somebody who knows all the optimizations that they would want in your application. And I'm doing this in the context of you going to a potential client, kind of like what I talked about at the start. They've got some problems in their business and you're just having a chat with them to figure out if you can do anything to help them. And the idea is we want to have a business structure where we can build a prototype ridiculously fast, where it doesn't even need a real database. Their computer acts as the database, but that'll make more sense a little bit later on in this video. Okay, so how about we make this green and then this one red? And I think that's pretty much it. Of course, we need a dialog here as well. So let's come up here and say, what's the con question mark? Actually, instead of doing it in there, I'm just going to cut that, paste it there to turn it into a text object. And then you would have a form in here as well. So that's going to need the description. And I think that's about it. Because then what we would do is if you click on con, it'll show this dialog and automatically set the type equal to a con. And if you select pro, it automatically sets the type to a pro. So how about we come in here now, we go text import and description, or maybe it's got the word like con in it, which how about this? What's the con? That'll make it easier for the user. What's the con? Okay. So pretty simple, really basic forms. In reality, you might not, if this was literally all your application was ever going to be, you might not go as far as we're going to go with the architecture. Honestly, I actually would go as far as I'm going to go with the architecture, because once you get used to these architectural designs, it actually becomes easy to do apps quickly with good architecture from the start. As you get to know the patterns. When you're starting out, you need to do a bit of thinking, but when it becomes second nature, it's almost just as fast as if you were to do it sort of all on the index page, for example. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So the next thing we do is once we have a feel for what it looks like, we then start naming our components. And we have some patterns for this. And that is blue means something that's related to a module or a model. So for example, this table would, we're going to put a blue square around it because it relates to list, which is something that we would have in our database. Or you can think of that as a model, or in the context of what we're building, you think of it as a module. When I say module, you can almost convert that to model in your head, or like a row in a database. That's not always exactly true, but it's almost always how it is, where a row in the database or a model on the back end is what list would be in this example. And since this table is related to a model, aka module, it's going to have a blue square around it. Okay, so we select, if I hold control here, it stops the snapping, and I'm just going to put a square around this whole thing, and I'm going to make the border of that square blue. Okay, and then I'm going to create another square here to name it, and we're going to call this Manage Lists Table. Now, I've got a very intentional naming convention here. Whenever you can do CRUD operations, the word manage is used. So since this is all going to be able to create, update, delete, etc., that's why we use the word manage. There might be other words that you could use for that. We're deciding on the word manage. And if we decide on that as a team, a lot of my decisions you might not entirely agree with, or you might not be used to, but if we can all decide on a word as a team, then it means that we can very easily find each other's components. So I know the moment I look at this in an app, even if I'm coming to this app for the first time, I know how to find that table component. And sure, you can use Vue DevTools to very quickly find components, but it's even easier if you can just search for components because you know how everything is named. Okay, so there's a few things here. Manage, which means we can do basically full CRUD operations on this list. List, because it's the name of the model. It's got to be plural, so you wouldn't say manage list table. This has to be list. It's very important that you make it plural, because otherwise you can end up with name clashes in the future. And then, of course, the name of the Quasar component. So there's a few intentional things here. That's the name of the Quasar component. So it's a Q table component. If it were I think Quasar's got another component called data table. If you were to be using that, you would call this a manage lists data table component. So this last word always matches up with the Quasar component, unless there is no Quasar component that it associates with. And then again, list is the name of the model. Make sure you choose to either pluralize or singularize it, and then manage, meaning that it does all the things. So I'm going to basically just join that up to the blue square. And now the next thing I'm going to introduce is the concept of views. So we're going to put another square around all of this. And it might look a little bit redundant in this example. It's actually not, but we'll put another square around this. Because we're going to add another component which houses this manage lists table. Now this component, which we're going to call a view, it can often hold a whole bunch of components inside of it, and its job is to orchestrate the data for all of the other components within it. All right, I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a second. Let's just give it a name. And we're going to call this, it's going to have a very similar name, manage lists view. So everything inside of this component is related to managing lists. And when you see the word view here, what that means is this component is in charge of doing backend requests. So things like creating, updating, deleting, all of those operations belong on this component. That's really important. Our lower level components, or our module or model components, these ones that are in blue, they don't do any backend requests. They're completely backend agnostic. They don't know anything about the store. They're very, very dumb. All they do is accept the data, usually from a view, and they also fire events. So for example, in the view, and look, this will all make more sense when we actually start writing code. So the view is in charge of getting all of the lists from the backend and inserting them into the store. Then once it's got them, it sends them down to this component, which then displays all of those items. And then when we want to create something, that create button, all it does is this component emits an event and says, hey, manage lists view, I want you to create something. Okay, so this component sends an event up to the view, and then the view is the one that's in charge of doing the creating or the updating or the deleting. Again, this component's very dumb. I'll even write these down quickly. So no knowledge of API, and I'll put in parentheses here, backend, because that's usually what we think of, the word that we think of. And I'll also put in here, no knowledge of store, which is about 90% true. I'm not going to go into why, but that's basically the case. So no knowledge of the API, no knowledge of the store. And then you would also have a page on top of this, which would be manage lists page. And all it does is essentially display any views. In this case, there's only one view, but sometimes your page would have more than one view in it. I might even leave that there, and maybe we give that a color. I haven't thought of a color for this. Let's make it green. Green for pages. Okay, so now I can grab this line, attach it to the purple part, and I might just grab these two, copy, paste them over here, because they're pretty much going to be the same thing for our, whatever I end up calling this. I'll probably just call this a pro-con. Yeah. So list/list ID, and I'll just put the word up here. So like pro-con, because I'm thinking we'll use the same table for that. Okay, anyway, let's move on to this part here. I'm going to square this part off. And by the way, this part, this squaring around things where we're setting them to blue and purple, so basically mapping out where the components are going to be. Basically, usually I would be in charge of this to begin with, because I've done this so many times and I have a lot of knowledge of how components should be broken down with this architecture. And then the idea is, as you guys get to know it more and more, you would then become the person, you would become someone who can do this as well. So once you get a better idea and you've built a few applications with this architecture, you would then very quickly be able to do this yourself. So we'll set that equal to blue, and this is for the form. And actually, let me just grab that. And this would be a list form. So it's not a create list form. It's not an update list form. We're going to keep that agnostic by just calling this a list form. And then this dialog here will, instead of just doing another one for create and update, I'll just have here create list dialog, and then another one here, which will be update list dialog. Okay, so we'll have a line going from that to, whoops, I haven't squared it off yet. So let's copy this, paste it about there. So that's for the dialog. And there we go. They're pretty much the same thing, but then of course you change the word create to update. You might make a couple of other tweaks to that dialog for updating something. Okay, so that's pretty much that. I'm going to breeze through these ones because I don't want to drill those concepts again. I've already described them now. So we'll call this manage pro cons table. Pro con is the name of the model. Manage because it's CRUD. Table because it's a Quasar table component. Oh, sorry, this is manage pro cons view because purple is for view. And let's just copy paste that there. Manage pro cons table. Okay. So, whoa. Again, I just want to make sure that I've got the square on its own. And that'll be for the view. And that's going to encompass these buttons as well, these floating action buttons. And let's paste that there. And we'll square out the table. Okay, so there's our table. Okay, it's latching onto the wrong thing, but that doesn't matter. We can see what it means. And of course, in reality, you would possibly have like 2 or 3 views on this page, depending on the complexity of your application. And then you might have, you know, a whole bunch of different modules in there. So, and like different components for the different modules. This is a very basic example that could, you know, very much grow over time. Now, another cool thing I want you to think about with views is, since views are the ones that make backend requests and they're the ones that work with the store, they can be moved around our application. So this view could be in a dialog. This view could be in a tab. So you could have multiple tabs in your application. So for example, let's just imagine we got a bunch of tabs like this, and then this could be like list A, another one here that's list B, and then clicking on those different tabs could show different views. So clicking on list A, for example, might show you manage pro cons view for list A. And then on list, if you click on here, it would show manage pro cons view for list B. So the point is, by breaking it down into a view, you can now start moving it quite freely around your application, because you know it's got everything it needs to get data from the backend, and it's got everything it needs to insert that data into the store. Furthermore, your blue components, you know that you can move them freely around your application, because you know that it doesn't care where it gets its pro cons from. All it cares is that it gets them. So, you know, you can move this table into all sorts of different contexts, and as long as it's getting its pro cons, then it's going to work. Okay, again, a lot of these concepts might not click right now, but they will later on. Okay, I don't want this video to be too long. It's probably going to be like over an hour, so let's go ahead and quickly push forward. I'll move this to the right, paste that there, and we'll call this pro con form. That would be singular. Paste it there. And then we'll have create pro con dialog. And then another one here for, I don't think you would actually need an update one. What I'm imagining is, when you first created it, it goes into the table, but then you can directly update it inside of that table. Yeah, we might do it that way. So now let's quickly map out what we've just written there. So that form is going to be super simple. It's literally just one input. But if it ever grew, if your application grew and it needed more inputs, it would be very easy to find where to put them. And create pro con dialog. So let's square this off. Hold control so I can resize that. And there we go. So I think we've just about got everything mapped out now. I'm going to open up my terminal and we can go ahead and create this application. So we're going to use dgit in order to get the repository. And so instead of saying git clone and then the name of the repo, which is, I'm going to quickly paste it here just in case you need it. Modular. Give me one quick second. And I'll quickly show you what it is. So this is the template we're using, the modular Quasar template. Instead of doing something like this, which means you end up with the .git file, we're going to use something called dgit. It's kind of a funky name because dgit, in other words, we're going to create a Git repo based on that, but then we're going to get rid of the .git file. So we say dgit. I've actually already done this before, so I can just run it once and it shows me the ones that I've already used dgit on. Modular Quasar template, and then choose a destination directory for that. So we'll call this pro-cons, or how about we just call this, yeah, pro-cons is fine. Use the cache version. I'll say no, just in case there's been any changes. And there we go. dgit is really, really quick. And if I cd into that pro-cons, and then I do an ll, you'll notice that there's no .git folder. So it basically, all it does is get rid of that .git folder, and I think it does some other snazzy stuff to make it fast and does some caching for you. Now, if you can't get that working, that's totally fine, because I know that UMark had some problems with this in the past. It's not very Windows friendly. Or maybe it's another problem, I don't know. Then the next thing you want to do is just say git clone the repo, and then just do a rm-rf, or however you remove it on Windows. I'm not sure if it's different. .git. So you just want to get rid of that .git folder. Okay, so we're inside of the app now. I'm just going to run pnpm install. I've got an alias for pnpm, which is p. So when you see me write p, that means pnpm. If you don't know what that is, it's a package manager, just like npm or yarn, but it's super, super fast. So I really, really like it. And it does some really cool stuff to manage dependencies and make sure that you don't end up using too much space on your computer, and does some mad linking of packages. Anyway, that's not important. So let's say p install. So I'm going to install all the dependencies inside of there, which should run pretty quickly, and it did. Now I can open this project up in Visual Studio Code, and then I might zoom in once to make it easier for you to view. Let's run pdev, which is pnpm dev. Control click that, and here's our application. Give it a second to load, because Veet's going to be doing some fancy stuff. And there we go. This is our app ready to be built. Now, that brings us to the next step. We now need to figure out the structure of our app. So what I might do is throw that over onto the left side, and then make it rather small. And then we're going to go to schema.blue. So if I go here, schema.blue, this is, if you don't have login details for this, should I tell people this or not? This is going to be public. Oh yeah, it's fine. Look, just be aware, if you use this project, it is quite new, and it's very possible that things will end up breaking in the future. So don't rely on it too much for now. It's something that I'm building for my team so that we can get on the same page about how we build apps. Yeah, so if you go to /register, you should be able to register an account there. I'm not sure the register page is working properly. I haven't really spent a lot of time to build it, because it's mostly in the development stage right now. But anyway, I'm going to make sure that all of you guys have an account for this. We can select an organization, and I'm going to go ahead and create a project. So let's call this pro cons. And we can say for the description, make a pros and cons list. By the way, I should tell you what this is. Basically, this is an app for building the structure of our application. And then what happens is this creates a JSON schema for us, and we use that schema in order to generate files for our application. So this is what I'll be using to bridge the gap between the models in my application and a front end that's using TypeScript. So we're going to end up with fully typed models after we've defined it all inside of this app. And the idea is down the line, that'll be the same for backends like Laravel. I'll be able to automatically generate migrations, requests, and controllers and all that sort of good stuff based on some of the things that we define here. Now, the repo for this, I'm just going to say Quasar army /pros-cons, even though that doesn't exist yet. And we'll say pros-cons for the slug. Let's give it a color. I usually like using blue. Let's go for that kind of purpley blue. I got a little bit of a bug here where we're going to do a UUID preset. Basically, module merge is for things that are fields that are going to be in every single module. So every module, and by the way, remember, whenever I say module, you can convert that to model in your head, because modules are basically models, but there are some situations where the word model doesn't make sense, so I had to call it modules instead. But we can talk about that later. We got this UUID preset, meaning it'll have a primary key of ID. Sorry, what am I saying? Yeah, that just gives us an ID on all of our models by default. So let's create that. And the bug is I just need to click on edit, click on that UUID, press update in order for it to work. Otherwise, the JSON does something funky. So this is just a little thing I need to fix, which might even be done by the time you watch this video. Okay, we got our project, so we can click on it. The next thing I'm going to do actually is click on here and get an API token. So if I go to API tokens, And I might even just do this on another, no, I won't do it on another screen. I'll just delete the token when I'm done. Even if you have the token, it doesn't really matter. There's nothing nasty you can do with it yet. So we'll create a new API token, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to say Lugu, because that's the nickname I gave myself. And that's going to show you your API token once. So now you can copy it. And we're going to go back to our project in VS Code after copying that. And we're going to go to our .env example, Control-Shift-P, duplicate. You might need to install this file utils library in order to do it with my shortcuts that I just showed you there. But basically what we're doing is we're making a copy of that and calling it .env, and then we're just pasting the token in there. Now blue is, so schema blue is the name of the tool that we're using, or blue is the name of the CLI tool. And what it does is it essentially keeps this schema that we're about to create in sync with our project. Okay, so we've pasted the token in there. I can close that out now. Let's just see if that's showing up here. Oh, I fixed that bug, but I haven't pushed it yet. Yeah, okay, so this page does freeze. I'm just going to copy that, close it out, paste that link in there. And I've fixed it, but I haven't pushed it. Okay, so going back to the project now, we can click on that project, and we're going to copy the project ID, and I'm going to paste that in here. So essentially what we've done is we've made a way for our editor to stay in sync with anything that we do inside of this project here. And the way this works, if I open up my console now and just do a split here, by the way, I did Control / to get that split. I can now say P and PM. Remember, I aliased that to P, and I believe it's just blue : listen. So you can see by default, this template has got, I thought it did. All right, so I have to add that to the modular Quasar template. I'll add that later. You can follow along with me anyway. We'll say blue, listen. And what that runs is blue, listen. Pretty sure that's the whole command. So this CLI tool is already installed for us. And if I come in here and say blue, listen now, things are about to make a lot more sense. So what it's doing is it's listening for changes on this project. And if I control click that, it basically just takes us back to where we were. So every time I create a new module here, and we'll do one now as an example, for example, our list, we can give it a description if we want. We don't really need to. When I create that, this automatically picks up those changes, runs our generators, that creates a schema file for us. So now we've got this schema for the list, all right, and it's merged that ID in there. And it's also created a model for us. So now we've got a list model that's fully typed. So whenever we're working with the list, it automatically, our editor is going to be super friendly with it. That's all going to make more sense soon. So basically what we do now is we map out our entire application. And I'll quickly just show you, if we go into this list and we give it a title, or I might even just use the word name for this. So let's go field name. You can say list title, for example, here for the label. It's going to be a string, and you can choose a component for that. Currently, this whole component library thing hasn't been fully built, but soon you'll be able to select a component, which means whenever, if you create a table, you will be able to create tables that automatically generate themselves because they'll know what components to use because we're able to define them up front. You can forget I said that, that's for later. So basically we're saying a list has got a name. If you're used to using something like Strappy, this will make a lot of sense to you. And we can just start defining what our structure looks like. Now, as soon as I make that, notice that, you might have seen it happen there. It automatically now adds that onto my model, and it also automatically adds it onto my schema. So this cool little tool here is keeping everything in sync with my code base. Really, really awesome. And you're going to see how that comes in handy soon. So let's just grab, we'll have the Miro on the left side here. We also want to have a color. So let's come in here. We'll have a field called color. And that's going to be a string create. Number of pros, that's something that'll be calculated based on related data. And yeah, this table is really simple. It's just got a title and a color. Now, the next thing we want is our list, which has a description, whether or not it's a pro or a con, and the importance out of 10. So let's come in here and add a module. By the way, I should add titles here. This is our modules, this is our fields, and this is where you can then edit things. So we'll add another one here, which is another module called pro con. And you'll notice that it actually automatically adds those underscores for us. So it enforces a, what do you call that? Basically, it enforces a casing there. So it's always going to be snake case for the name of the module. So pro, con, and it's telling us to do it singular. You don't want pro, cons here, just pro, con. We'll go ahead and create that. Click on it. And as I said before, it's going to have a description, field, description, field type, string. We'll go ahead and create that. Another thing it's got is an importance. So we'll go field for that. Importance, field type, and that's going to be a integer. So it's just going to be a number between 1 and 10. So we'll go ahead and create that. And that's pretty much it. Then we want to know if it's a pro or a con. And I might just make that a Boolean. Yeah, let's just make that a Boolean. So we'll say is pro. And by the way, I'll show you this again. If I try and do a space there, is space pro, it automatically converts it to that casing. And that's intentional. We want to make sure that that casing is enforced. So we'll make that a Boolean. Go ahead and create that. And there we go. We've mapped up our data. The other thing we want to have is a relationship. So a list has many pro cons. So let's go here and say relationship. A list has many pro cons. And there we go. Now notice if I go to pro con, it's also done the inverse of that relationship for us. So a pro con belongs to a list. So those two relationships basically work on both ends when you define them. Now we come back here to our editor, you'll notice that this has all been populating for us behind the scenes because of that CLI tool that's running. So now our entire data structure for our app is done. And this is what I meant by the dream before, where we can do this. We can go talk to a client and we'll have a mobile friendly version of this. And on the way home, we'll be able to just map out our data structure. And then when we sit on our computers, we come in here and we say P blue listen or PNPM blue listen. And then literally that quickly, it will have already generated everything for us. We even get our modules directory. So if we go to source modules, we've even got our blank module directories up and ready to go. So how cool is that? Really, really easy to get started with your data structure. Now, the next thing we're going to do is something that I eventually want to add to schema.blue. So eventually, I want schema.blue to also know about the components we want to generate. So we'll also be able to sit in the car and go, oh, we want to have a manage components table. And then what that would look like is clicking on pro con, and then up here you would have, for example, one that says fields, and then another menu up here that says front-end components or whatever. And then when you click on that menu, you can say all the components that you want to generate automatically. And the moment you sit down at your computer and run this command, not only does it generate all your models, it also populates all of your components as well. So inside of these directories, all your components would be there ready for you to start coding. Really, really cool. But that part's the dream. So we're gonna have to do it ourselves for now. Might just close these two out. So what I'm going to do, what's the easiest way to set this up? I'm used to doing this with multiple screens. Yeah, let's do it this way. And then I'll hide that, open up my menu here. I want to make sure you see everything clearly. Oh, I've lost those buttons. They're not showing up for some reason. That's all right. We'll zoom in a little bit. I'll close down the server for now, and we can go ahead and get started. So we want to have a we won't do pages right now because I haven't got generators for them yet. We'll do a manage lists view. So we'll say hygiene view new. This is a view for a module. What module is it for? It's for the list module. And then we're going to call this a manage. Often I usually even just double click here, copy it, click back, Control Shift V to paste it. And there we go. That's been created for us. And I'll show you where that was created. And our source list views. And so this is where all of our views belong. And that was automatically generated for us. And it even gives us a test file as well. So we can begin writing tests if it makes sense for this project. When you're prototyping I don't write tests. I just quickly get it out there and then you can do tests later on. It's kind of redundant until you got a better picture of what the client wants, at least in my opinion. So we got our view, and I'm just going to do this for everything else now. There we go. Might make that a little bit smaller. So we have our manage list table. Oops, someone's trying to call me. Let me just check if that's important. Might have just been a spam caller. All right, that was my girlfriend, so I'm going to have to stop this stream, and I'll continue in a second. Okay, we're back. So let's punch through some of these. Manage list table. So remember, purple is view, and the blue ones are for modules. So we say hygiene. By the way, if you don't have hygiene, I think you do like npm install -g or whatever you're using for your global dependencies, hygiene. And hygiene is just a tool that makes it easy to generate files. And what that's doing behind the scenes, we won't go into this now, but I'll quickly show you. This underscore templates directory, it uses that in order to generate the files for us. And the page one, I believe, is currently wrong because I've just recently updated. Oh, maybe this is right, actually. Let me just quickly have a look at one of these. No, I think it's wrong. Okay, anyway, we'll work on, we can look at pages later on. So that's how that works. Hygiene just uses that underscore templates directory, which is something I've already prepared in this template. So you don't even have to think about it. Just get hygiene installed. And now we can do another one, hygiene component new. Okay, remember the blue ones are components. This is for a module. This is for our list module. And now our Control Shift V, manage list table. By the way, I just want to quickly show you, if I were to put a typo in there, it won't work. You have to have the name of the module inside of the component. And that's enforced because I always want to make sure it's easy to find these components. I'd rather them have slightly longer names, and everybody knows that a component related to a list is going to have the word list or lists, plural, inside of it. So that's very intentional, and it's even said so here. You've got to make sure that it's got the module name in it. Okay, so we go ahead and create that. Moving across, we've got a list form. So hygiene component new for a module for a list, and this is the list form. Hygiene component new for a module for a list, and this is the create list dialog. Hygiene component new for a module for a list, and this is the update list dialog. And there we go. And then hygiene component new for a, oh, hang on, this isn't a component, Control C. Hygiene view new. Whoop. For a module, for a pro-con, and this is the manage pro-cons view. We'll do a new component, also for pro-con, manage components table. You can see you can very quickly just sort of smash through this, especially if you put all of these like one on top of the other. Yeah. Okay, so now we'll say hygiene component new. This is for a pro-con, and then we'll do another one for a form. There's actually a way to do this where you can also pass through the parameters, but I usually just use the CLI tool like this. For a module, for a pro-con form. Cool. Pretty sure that's all of our components. After I've done all of that, I'm going to restart Vola, Control-Shift-P Vola, and run restart view server, because usually Vola does not like it when you make new components using generators. So I usually always have to restart Vola. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start building our application. the first thing we need to do is build a page. There's going to be a little bit of magic in what I'm about to show you. But I think it's better that I describe some of that magic later on, especially around pages. So if we go to modules, we want to have a page for our list. So if I go into list and create a new folder, again, I don't have generators for this yet. So a new folder in there, pages, and then I'm going to create a new file called routes.ts. Now this file is automatically going to be registered for us. So if I say const main, that's automatically going to register a main route for us. So we say that's equal to, and let me just jump into our normal routes file to remember what the typing is here. Yeah, route record raw. I might even just copy that whole thing. There we go. And that's going to be an array of route record raw. Just means we get typing here. So we make that an array, and now we can put an object inside of there, and we're going to give this route a name, and it's going to be lists. What would I do this? List.manage is what we'll call that. And then we'll give it a path, which is going to be /lists, basically what we wrote up here. And then this needs to have a component as well. And then inside of pages, I'd create a new folder here. Again, I wish I had generators for this, but it's kind of good to do things manually for now so you really understand what's going on. And we'll call this the manage lists page. And it has to have the word page on the end. Again, we follow a lot of these conventions here to make sure it's super easy for other devs to know what's going on. New file, manage list page.view. Now, why is this sitting in a folder? I've already explained this to all of you guys before, but I'll quickly go over it again. We put it in a folder because chances are eventually this page is going to get out of hand and we're going to have composables that we want to push off to the side. By basically agreeing as a team that we put everything in folders, it makes it easier in the future to just put composables inside of here. So for example, you might have like a use lists indexer composable that you can now push to the side and then use inside of that page. Okay, so that's just a very quick overview of why we put things in folders. Now we go to routes, we got a component, and that's our manage list page. But we want to do it so that we get code splitting. Now by doing it like a function like this, we get code splitting, which basically means until we hit this route, the component isn't loaded. So if I were to do it this way, manage lists page, and I would have put it directly in there like you would usually see things being imported, then that means that the moment we land in our application, that component gets loaded, which means it might take a little bit longer to load our application. And honestly, in this app, since it is quite a small app, I would probably do that. I would just import it like this. The reason being, I would rather just have the entire app loaded from the get-go. The other way to do it is with code splitting, and this is how it's usually done because it means as your app gets bigger, you don't affect that load time too much. And you can do that by saying arrow function, import, we'll say / manage list page, manage list page.view. Okay, so again, this means that component isn't loaded until we hit the route. But if we do it this way, it means that that component is loaded the moment we land down our application. Okay, so if this route file is run, that component is loaded. Okay, this has to have an export on it. Now, again, I'm not going to go into details, but I've done some magic that basically says if you go to a modules folder, pages, routes, this is automatically going to be picked up and added to our routes file. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like. If I say pdev here, and we open that up, and we go to /lists, it is not showing up. Let me just check that we have got that magic in the routes folder, and that the word that we use is main. So we got base and main there. And it's possible that I've done it wrong. Just give me a quick second. Modules, something routes.ts. Modules, something. Okay, so it doesn't go in the pages directory. It goes directly inside of that list directory. So the mistake was I put routes in pages, which it really shouldn't be there. It was supposed to be directly inside the list directory. And what I might do is make it so that we automatically generate that file by default when we generate a module directory in the future, so that that mistake doesn't happen again. Okay, so now I'm gonna have to change this slightly. No, that looks right. And I'm just going to say template inside of here, add a queue page, add some padding to that page, and then say working here, just to check that that's working. And there we go. So again, let me just quickly go over everything I did there. We created a pages directory. Every component gets its own directory. So we created a manage lists page folder and a manage list page file. Then we created this routes this routes file, which points to the manage list page component. And it's automatically going to be registered for us. So if you have a model or a module, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to call it modules from now on. If you have a module like list and then you put routes directly inside of there, it automatically finds this exported variable called main and registers the route for you. Now, we can also do this with base, and what that means is it registers that route without the skeleton. So we wouldn't get this header here. So let me just do that, and I would have to change this from a page to a normal div now. Yeah, so those are the two options you've got. You've got base and you've got main, and a main is going to give you the skeleton of your application, and base is just going to be a blank, sort of like a blank slate for that route. Okay, so that's all done. Let's go ahead and start building now. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. And the first thing we want to do is display the view inside of this page, so the manage lists view. So I might even just get rid of all of that. And we're going to make this a queue-page component. It's going to have some padding. And then inside of there, I'm just going to whack in the manage lists view. So the page by default is very, very simple. And it essentially just works as a place where we can put other things that it's particular to the page in the future. And hang on, I've gone into the wrong file, haven't I? Whoops. Manage lists page. Now see how quickly I can find things by just searching? So I'll often do Control P and find files rather than looking through it in my file menu. Okay, manage lists page. All right, and then I would put the manage lists view inside of there and get that imported. And let's just check if that's working now. Yep. So now we're showing the view inside of that page. And what's next? Well, inside of that view, we've got the manage lists table. So let's go ahead and whack that inside of the view. Sorry, this shouldn't be a page. This should be a div. So views will be divs and pages will be pages. So now we can say here, manage list table. All right, and now we got the manage list table component, which we generated earlier. Okay, now what I usually do at this point is I'll comment that out now. And the first thing I want to do is figure out how to get my data. And then to display that data inside of here. Now that's a little bit hard to begin with because we don't have any sample data. So we will have to create some data first. But yeah, now I'll show you the tooling that we use for that. So we'll import use indexer from @viewModelCore. And we'll say const indexer is equal to use indexer. And then we pass through their list. Okay, so there's a little bit happening here. We're pulling in a composable from this library. All right, this is a library that I created for dealing with backend data. We imported list, right, which was automatically generated for us using the schema.blue tool that I showed you earlier. Okay, so we imported this list here. And now our indexer, in order to get all of our lists, all we have to do, and a lot of you who've worked on large projects in the future might be blown away by this, may or may not be blown away. In order to get the data, all we have to do now is say, for example, immediate true, which means that's immediately going to run index on that. So all that means is it runs indexer.index straight away. And that's going to get all of our data, and then we're going to display it inside of a pre-tag. Indexer, show me the records.value. And that's it. That's how we fetch data from the back end. Currently, we have none. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to pull out of here use creator. And I'll come in here and say const creator is equal to use creator, and we'll pass through the list there. And I'll say creator dot create, pass through an object. And if I do control space here now, notice that we get auto completion. This is really, really cool. I don't want you guys to miss how freaking awesome this is. Because we use this tool, right? Any changes we make here, and I'll quickly just show you that. If I go to, actually, no, I'll show you the entire pipeline first. Whenever we make changes here, this tool that we ran, and remember to run it was just pm blue : listen. It picks up on those changes straight away because this is using, it's basically got a WebSocket connection to that server. So it picks up on those changes straight away, regenerates our models. In this case, we're working with a list. And now we've got a fully typed list. So we've got the name, the color, and the ID typed, including the relationship, has all been typed for us. And that means that when we pass it through to our indexer, the thing that fetches the data from the back end, or when we pass it through to our creator, everything is fully typed. So for example, that our indexer knows that it's using this list model. Let me just control click that, right? That's the one I showed you earlier inside this directory. Therefore, if I say records value and we say 0, for example, dot, that's fully typed and we can see all of the fields on that. And when we work with the form, so creator.create, if I do control space, it's fully typed. When you're working with a form, Creator gives you a form for free. So if I say creator.form.value dot, it's fully typed. So we get this beautiful line of clarity with very little effort because we don't have to build these models by default. Now, here's the next cool thing. By default, the modular Quasar template uses your computer as a database. So check this out. When we now create something and we say the name of this list is equal to some example, let's just do that. And then we'll give it a color equal to, I'll just say green. So if I click on save, then this is going to run. I'll quickly refresh the page there. So there we go. That's been inserted into the store now. So I'm going to get rid of that code because it's already been run. In fact, I think I accidentally ran it twice. Yeah, that's okay. So check this out. If I opened up the console and we go to application, IndexedDB, key value store, list.records. Let me just delete these two. This is from something I was working on earlier. Those values are now sitting on the user's computer. So your computer is acting as a database here, but it gets better. Not only is your computer acting as a database, it's got a whole bunch of functionality. So when you want to start working with relationships, if I say with, I can say, give it to me with my pros, cons, right? And you can just write it like that. That's now also going to fetch the pro cons as well, in which case we have none at the moment. If I want to do any filtering, I can now add some filters there as well. And if I do control space there, that gives us all the possibilities for filtering. So I want to say the name, control space, contains, control space. Oh, sorry, not control space at this point. So where the name contains the word some, for example. Let's get rid of the with part. Save it. And you'll notice that shows everything. I'll just throw that back over there. But if we want to say where the name contains just something random, it no longer shows up. So we have, not only have we got the user's computer working as a database, we have all this functionality. When we're ready to use a real backend, we can actually just swap it out so that instead of using the user's computer as a database, we can use a backend as a database. Now, some of you might be thinking, this is kind of like GraphQL. And the truth is, yes, in some ways it is, but in many ways it's not. In fact, GraphQL could be the backend for View Model, or it could be Laravel, or it could be Strapi. You can use a whole bunch of different backends for this. Currently, it's I've only implemented Laravel and basically using the user's computer as a backend. But the cool thing is you can prototype very quickly, but you can also turn your prototype into something real very quickly. Because once you're done prototyping, you just swap out the backend and all of your code can stay the same. And then you can focus on building your backend code. So hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, I don't want you to worry too much, because this is one of those things you have to just keep revisiting. And the more you revisit it, of course, the easier it gets. So now that we've got all of that, I'll get rid of the creator for now. We'll bring this table back in. Whoops. We'll get rid of the filters. Oh, okay, there's one more thing I want to show you now. This is not quite how we would write the code. In order to find out where this component is, I'm going to do Control-Alt-M. And I like to say in my head, Control-Alt, make visible. So just make it visible where this component is. And as I keep saying, every component gets its own folder. Now, this composable here can very quickly get out of hand. So what we do is we basically, we put this into its own file. So we create a new file here, and we'll call it use lists indexer.ts. Now, I've got a template for this. You can just copy what I've written there, maybe make your own template. So now I got this export of use lists indexer, and I'm going to go back to the component, cut that code back to that composable. In fact, let me just do these side by side. That might be easier for you. And we're just going to paste the composable in here and get that imported, get that imported. Now these two can go and that can go. And now pay attention carefully here. Now what we do is we use the spread operator to return indexer. This might look a little bit weird to you because essentially all we're doing is that, right? So why would you use the spread operator there? And the reason is if you want to add any functionality in the future, it's really, really easy to do that now. So for example, if you have dialogues, you could say, for example, const show, I don't know, records dialog, not a great example, is equal to ref, which is false by default. You can then just add that on like this. So this is a place where anything related to indexing lists for this view can now sit inside of this file. Now, I know this is all a lot of information, but I need to tell you one more thing. We call this a single context composable. So there are two types of composables. There's multi-context composables and single context. All that means is this composable is only used for this view. It's not supposed to be used in other parts of our application. It's only used for getting the list inside of this view, all right? It's got one context. We don't use it in other contexts. We don't import this from other parts of our application. Anything inside of a folder like this, for example, the managed lists view folder, should not get imported from other parts of our application. It only belongs in this one context, and that makes our code very manageable. So if you wanted to do an index of lists somewhere else in your application, you would rewrite all of this code again. That's really important because this code's very volatile. By that I mean, if I were to add, for example, with here, well, maybe in some places it makes sense to use with because you're pulling in the pros and cons, but maybe in other parts of your application, you want to get the lists but not with something else. You just want to get the list on its own. And now you've got this redundant inclusion of this extra data, which is going to mean that the hit on the database is it's more of a strain on the database because you're getting all of these related records. That's just a small example, but another great example is filters. You might start adding filters inside of here. And so for that reason, we make sure that this composable is only used in one context. We're only using this composable for managing, for this managed list view. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, I'll give you an example of a multi-context composable. Use indexer. So often multi-context composables, almost always, they're in libraries. Now, these are composables that have been thoroughly thought out. You want to make sure that your composables that are going to be used all throughout your application have been very much thought out, because if I were to break something in my use indexer, if I change code here and it breaks something, that now is going to break code all over my application. So that's why it's super important to distinguish between the two. Multi-context composables like this, which can be used all over your app, you have to be very careful because they're volatile, and if you change them, it can break things all over your application. You want to make sure you got really good version control for multi-context composables. Single context composables, you can change this, you can do whatever you want here, and you don't have to be worried about breaking shit somewhere else, okay? And it's really not a big deal to have to write the code again, all right? And that's why I spent a lot of time focusing on building these composables and abstracting as much as I could so that we can make these really simple files later on down the line without having to rewrite a bunch of that code. Okay, so those are some very important concepts I wanted to get across. Feel free to rewind it and listen to all of that again. All right, let's carry on. So now we've created that composable, the use list indexer. We're going to say const list indexer is equal to use lists indexer. All right. And now look how much cleaner that is. Our code looks really nice now. It's very obvious what this does. It indexes lists. And if you don't know what index, that word's a bit weird for you and you're used to saying things like fetch, don't worry, you'll get used to it very quickly. There are many reasons I won't dig into right now that I called it an indexer. It's very difficult to name these things and to avoid clashes, and I think indexer was the correct choice. So we're calling this a list indexer, and all that does is get lists from our backend. Okay, and of course, if it was for creating, we'd call this a list singular. List creator is equal to use list creator, and so on and so forth. Okay. Let's go ahead and build this table. The next thing we do is we be very methodical about this, and we make sure as we build this, we're in control. And I'll show you what I mean by that. We're going to cut that, the thing that I had in the pre-tag, and we're going to send through here lists, and that's equal to everything we got from the list indexer. List indexer records.value. Now, we're going to have to use TypeScript for the lists, and therefore I'm going to hover over this. And this is a very easy way to see what the type is. So I can see here it is a list array. So I can now do a copy on that. And when I go into this component, I'm now going to comment that out. I've got a bit of boilerplate here. This has a prop that's called lists, and that's its type. Control space, get list imported. And I'm just going to comment out emits for now. And the first thing we're going to do, remember I said we want to be in control. The first thing we're going to do is make sure we can now show those lists inside of this component. And there we go. So what I've proven there is that inside of manage lists view, we were able to fetch those lists and then send them down to this component. Now remember those rules I was talking about before? Where the one that's purple, it's the one that's in charge of getting data from the backend and inserting it into the store, getting it out of the store, creating it in the store, updating, blah, blah, blah. All of that, dealing with state and getting data is the responsibility of the view. Okay, it's happening here. We do not use the indexer inside of the component. As soon as we do that, we couple our list table to our indexer. The table should not know, it shouldn't care how it gets the list data. All it cares is that it gets it, right? It knows about the shape of the list, but it doesn't care how it gets that data. Okay. And there are reasons we do that that I won't go into right now. I think I briefly did touch on them before. So the rest is pretty easy. Now, since this finishes with the word table, this has to be a table component, QTable. It cannot be a div that wraps a QTable. It has to be a QTable. If you wanted to wrap that in a card or something like that, you would do it on the view. So you do something like this, QCard, and then maybe like a QCard section, right? If you wanted to do that, you could do it like this. But you would not do it on the component itself. The last word of this component must match up with the component here. One of the reasons we do that is I now know that I can do something like, what's a good example? I know that I can pass columns through to that. I know that I can pass a title through to that, right? Because this is all part of what a table can do. Now, even though there are ways around this, if I were to put that inside of a div, I can't pass through title anymore. Because what happens is, and we're going to go into this stuff in more depth later on, is that title attribute gets passed through to the table component and sent through to the div. So now div receives the attribute of title, and it's got no idea what to do with that. It doesn't know to put it at, so basically the table doesn't receive that title prop. It's like passing it through to the div, right? Which isn't what we want. And so there are some rare cases, I'm not even going to go into it right now. This is almost a hard and fast rule. You always want your root component to be the name of the last thing up here of your file. Okay, so now we can pass through some rows here, and that'll be the list. And let's just refresh that, and there we go. We've got those showing up. So the next thing we want to do is display that data nicely. And I'm just going to do a QTD here. Actually, let's do a Q template. Oh, what am I doing? Man, my brain's going a bit dead. We got a template here, and the slot for that is body, cell, and then the name of that column, which in this case is going to be the name. I did get ahead of myself. Let me just comment that out. We're going to jump out of the view, out of everything there. I'm going to do Control-Alt-M. And I want a place to have all of my columns. So if you've dealt with Quasar columns before, you'll know that we usually do columns like this. Oi, Lily, chill out. Hang on, I'm going to open the door so my dogs can say hi to my girlfriend. Come on, up you go. Crazy things. Okay. All right, so often you'll see people that put columns directly in like this, right? That's not great. You really want to try and get as much of this data-driven stuff out of your components as you can. So it's really not that hard to just basically turn this into a variable that sits somewhere else. Another thing you'll see is people doing something like this, const columns, and then they write out all of their columns like that. I really hate this personally. It just clutters the file, and then often people start doing it in one line like this because they want to save space and it's hard to read. I'd much rather be able to read my columns down the page like that, and I can't do this if it's all sitting in my table component because it ends up really, really long, and then I can't read this component properly. So always just create a new file inside of remember, everything gets a directory for this kind of thing. So we create a new file, we can just call it columns.ts. We don't have to call it manage list table columns or anything like that because it already knows what it's for because of the folder that it's in. So we can just call it columns.ts, and then we just say const, we say export const columns, and then we can use TypeScript here to get this fully typed. Q table column. Okay, looks like Vola might have died on me, so I'm just going to restart Vola. Give that a second. Get that imported from Quasar, and this is just going to be an array of columns. All right. So now that we've got that, why am I getting in there? Oh, I forgot the equal sign. Ha. now that we've got that, let me just split that and then jump into the component again, manage list table. And you would just get these columns imported now. So I should be able to just say columns here. And I can get that imported, /columns. And now we can just do all of our columns here. So we'll have the name. It'll have a name of name. Let's have the field equal to name. We'll have the label equal to name with a capital N. That might do for the moment. Yeah, and then I'll align that to the left. I'm just going to copy paste that down for the color. By the way, guys, this stuff is usually so much faster than what you're seeing here. It's because I'm trying to explain every tiny decision that I'm making, because I'm hoping that it'll help it sort of stick for you. And later on, I'll do videos like this where we just blast through it, and I won't explain things as I go because I'll assume that you already have this background knowledge of the why. For this, we'll align this to the center. And that's it. That's our columns. And now look how clean this is. We'll just get rid of that for now. We can just go, okay, they're the props that come in here, and then send the columns directly down to the table from the import. And if you want to know what those columns are, it's easy. You just go Control-click, and you're in there. And if you want to see everything related to this table, you just go Control-Alt-M, and there's all the stuff that's related to this component. It just sits there in a really nice spot, ready for you to work with. Okay, so template, body cell name. So we're targeting this cell here. By the way, the name field is what's used for us to target it. So if you were to change the name to something -else, then it would be something else like that. A lot of people get confused by this. It's not the field, it's the name that is used for us to target that specific cell. Okay, but often the name and the field are the same. And then people change them later on down the line and get confused by why it's not working anymore. It's because it's the name is what we use to identify it here. Okay, so next we're going to grab the scope out of that, and then we say props is equal to scope. This is just to make sure that this TD gets all of the styles that it needs. Oh, I don't even need one for the name because it's just the text. So, whoops, that's totally fine. We'll do one for the color though. And now often what I do here, just to make sure that I'm in control, and I think we can have a name here equal to color, or maybe props. I don't think I actually need to do that when I'm using a TD. It doesn't matter right now. Usually what I do is just throw a pre-tag in there and make it really clear what I'm working with. So we can see we've got our row here. So now let's go scope.row. All right. Another thing we can do is go scope.value. That gives us the value of that, which in this case is green. So I think that's actually what I'll use. So then I'll cut that. And then maybe we'll do something like this. Class is equal to background dash scope.value. Yeah, and then it just sort of like comes up in the whole cell. That's fine. I'm happy with that. And there we go. That's how we would architect this. This component has no idea how it got the lists. That was all covered by the view. Mosquito, one sec. See if I can smack this guy. Missed it. Bugger. We hate getting mosquitoes in here. Hang on, it's on the roof. I'm going to try and get him. No, you don't. Okay. Never miss an opportunity to try and get a mosquito. I don't even know how they get in here. Keep the doors closed. Okay, so there we go. We've got that table set up. Now we can push on. By the way, I'm accidentally teaching you just about everything in this one video, so don't feel like all the videos are going to be like this. All right, so we've actually built out most of this table. We now just want to have the update and the delete on there. So let's go into the columns, copy that, paste, update, capital U on that, and delete. And then this is going to have, oh, these ones are lowercase d. Okay, they're all centered. And then I'm going to copy this down, update, delete, body, cell, update, body, cell, delete. This is going to be a TD that's got a button inside of it. We don't want that class on there. We don't want that class on there. Q-button, I'm going to make it round, flat, and I'm going to set the color equal to kind of like a gray, so it's not too obvious. Or it's a blue, so I like to use light blue, or even just like a blue, maybe like a blue 7 for that. And there we go. And that's going to be for our delete button. Did I save the columns? Yeah, why aren't they showing up? Oh, there we go. Just had to refresh. And I spelled that wrong. There we go. We won't make this flat, but I'll make it unelevated. And then we'll give it an icon equal to MDI pencil, and I'll get that imported. By the way, I want you to see what I just did. I just imported that pencil icon. So we're pulling that out of Quasar Extras MDI version 7. This means we're only importing the icons that we need. So you'll notice in my quasar.config.js file that I'm not using, I've got an icon set, but I'm not using an icon library. And basically, rather than pulling in an entire icon library, we always import icons on the fly. Okay, so in this case, we're just importing that one icon from this library rather than the whole thing. I'm just going to open the window. It's getting hot in here. Woo. Okay, so it means we have a smaller file size because we're only importing that one icon. I don't think unelevated works. I think we'll go with flat. Yeah, that looks much better. We go, so we get those update buttons, and then we want the delete buttons as well. There we go. We'll call this MDI, maybe delete. Have we got that icon? Yeah, there we go. And we'll make that red faded out a little bit. So like a red 4 or a red 3. Yeah, okay. I think that looks decent. The color thing looks a little bit stupid now that I think about it. So let's just come in here, maybe do like a Q avatar. And I think there's like a BG color or like a color you can do for that. Yeah, so we can just do color there. Yeah, okay, that looks a little bit better, I think, rather than the whole cell. Now, next, we want to make it so that we can update and delete. Remember, this component is not in charge of updating or deleting. The view is in charge of updating or deleting. So we can come down here and we can say const emit is equal to define emits. I think it's emits plural. Yep. And now we can come down here and pass through that. Now, the new syntax doesn't work for me, so I'm still going to use the old syntax for this. If you're used to TypeScript, this might not look like what you're usually using. That's totally fine. So we first put in the name of the event. If you're not used to TypeScript, I'm now writing code that is TypeScript code. That's what this little object is in here. I won't go over it in detail because we're going to do a whole video on that. So the event is called update, and I expect to receive a list of type list. So there we go. That's an emit that is fully typed. And now let's copy paste that down, and we'll also have delete. And that's going to be, yeah, the same thing. It receives a list so it knows what to delete. And now all we do here is we come down here and we say, hey, when you click on the pencil, I want you to omit. And if I start writing a string there, it automatically types it for me, which is really nice. Thank you, Voila. Oh, sorry, that one's delete and that one is update. And now we're getting red squigglies because it also wants the row. So we need to come in here and say scope.row, and now it's happy. Same with here, scope.row. And when I say row, I mean the list. So the scope.row in this case is the list. Now, one of the cool things about this is junior devs can build things like this without knowing how to work with the backend. So they can build a component like this, make sure they got all the events being emitted, make sure all the props are being passed in, and then once they've built the component, they can pass that off to a senior dev. And in fact, what we could do when we're building apps, I don't think we will do it this way, but maybe we will in the future, is we can make one person in charge of doing all of the lower level components like this one here, and one person in charge of writing all of the code for doing the backend requests. So that person who's doing the backend request code will make all the creators, updaters, indexes, etc. And they would just focus on that. And then when the person who's writing the components is done, they would merge their code together. And then, yeah, the person who does the views would then just import all of those components and then send the data down and respond to the events that are being sent up. That would be really fun. It would be really cool to do something like that. Okay, I think that's pretty much done. So let's get delete working because that'll be super simple to do. Actually, no, we also want a create button on there. So the way I usually do this is just by going template. You can say top right. I think that, hang on, let's just do this. Yeah, so we want to tap into the top right, Q button. The icon will be MDI plus. Get that imported, and there's the plus button. We're going to make it round, and we're going to make it unelevated, and I'm going to set the color equal to our primary color for our application. There we go, that's working. I'm just going to go to the page quickly because I want to have some padding around here. So this is a good chance for you to see how we would do that. Manage lists table makes it pretty obvious how to get to the page. Manage lists page, right? The naming convention is very similar amongst these components. Oops, it's because that should be a queue page. There we go. So we got the create button. Let's come up here. We'll have another thing called create, and you can't pass the list when you're creating because it hasn't been created yet. So now we come down here and we say, hey, when you click on that button, I want you to emit an event called create. So we've done everything now for the lower level, quote unquote, lower level component. And now we can make our way up to the view. There's a few ways we can get there. You could go Control-Alt-M to see where this component is, and then jump into your views directory, and there's our manage list view. Honestly, the way I'd do it is Control-P, manage list view, and just type it in. Or you can go Control-V, MLV. Yeah, okay, in this case, it didn't really work very well. But yeah, you got manage list view there. Okay, that was a terrible example. Don't do that. You just type the whole thing out. Okay, so now that this knows how to send all of those events up to the parent, we can now start responding to them. So we need composables for creating, updating, and deleting. So I'm going to create a new file here called uselistupdater.ts. New file, uselistcreator.ts. New file, uselistDestroyer. Now, I know that might be confusing. We're using different language here. And that's because the word delete is a little bit difficult to work with because delete is a native word in JavaScript and in other backend languages. And so to create kind of a nomenclature that can work across different languages, we use the word destroy because usually the word destroy isn't being used within the language itself. So Laravel, at least to the best of my knowledge, PHP/Laravel, the word destroy is used in order to destroy things on the back end. So that language kind of lines up. And that language, I think, is used with Pina ORM as well. So anyway, you can forget I said all of that and just accept that we call this destroy and know that I do have good reasons to call it that rather than delete. Okay, creator. Composable, so we can use my template, and I'll say const creator is equal to use list creator. Oh, what am I doing? Sorry. Use creator. We're going to have to restart Vola here. I should only have to do that once and it should work with all the others now. There we go. Use creator, and then we pass the list through. 1, 2, 3, and there we go. That's our creator. I'm going to copy that, come down to the destroyer, composable, paste it in there, and just kind of use this to make it easier to get that going. That's a destroyer for a list, and we'll paste that in there. Sorry, get those two imported, and that's done. And let's do the same thing for updater. Paste that in there. Anything called destroyer changes to updater. And those two need to be capital U's. Get that imported. Get that imported. And there we go. We've got a nice place where we can keep anything related to creating, indexing, updating, and deleting. Now we go into our view and check out how beautiful this ends up looking. We can say const list creator is equal to use list creator. Get that imported. Use list updater. Get that imported. Use list destroyer. Get that imported. And there we go. We've now got everything we need to do all of those actions. And these composables are really, really cool. Wait till you see how fun it is to work with these. By the way, we could also add in here loading. Since we know this is a table, we know if you go to the Quasar docs, you would know that a table has got loading. Oh, by the way, let me show you something else quickly. Another thing we can do with our props is say interface props, but then we can add in there Q table props. And what this means is for our props, we're accepting the Q table props and we're accepting the props that we're passing through here. So all the ones that natively come with Q table. Is that going to work though? Hang on. That might mean that this isn't passed through anymore though. Let's just set loading there. Yeah, the problem with that is we've now hijacked the prop. Okay, you can forget I said all of that. That can be for another day. Yeah, so now we can pass loading here to see that the table's loading. Colon, this is the fun part where you sticky tape it all together. List indexer, if you're indexing dot value, then I want you to show loading. All right, and it happens so fast that you can only briefly see it kind of appear here for a second. But check this out. If you want to test loading, if we go to source boot view model, we've got a boot file for view model. I can come in here and under drivers, local. Oh, no, it's not under there. Where is it? Here we go. I think it's in here in the create pin local storage. We can add a mock latency here. So let's say a 500 millisecond mock latency. So see how we get that sort of, I'll do it a bit longer. Let's do 5 seconds. 2, 3, 4, 5. We can now mimic a really slow backend and, make it easy to test spinners and stuff like that. So what I might actually do is set that to 400 milliseconds so we can test things with spinners throughout this application. Okay. Creator, we're going to show a dialog. Updater, we're going to show a dialog. So let's do destroyer because it's some low-hanging fruit. We can say we get this fully typed. Delete. What I might actually do is change that to the word destroy instead. So let's change the omit to destroy just to sort of maintain the nomenclature there. Destroy, I want you to use the list destroyer to destroy. See that we get everything fully typed here. If you want to see everything it can do dot, and then you can see everything that it's got on it. And I want you to destroy something, and it's saying, hey, what's the idea of the thing you're going to destroy? And you remember that we pass through to the destroyer the list. And I want to say, yo, destroy the list with that ID. Now we can type this by putting it in parentheses and saying colon list. I thought that was going to be typed for me, to be honest. Maybe I need to restart Vola again. Hover over that. Okay, it is getting typed for me, I think. Okay, we do have a problem where... let me just jump into my list.ts. Yeah, this is something I need to fix. The ID can be null. We need to make it so the ID can't be null. That's why I'm getting a type error here, because it's saying, yo, you can't pass null through here. A quick way you could fix that, just to make TypeScript happy, is say that or an empty string. Yeah, I know it's not great, but we can just do that for now to get rid of the type error. Okay, delete, and it works. Delete, and it works. So there we go. Now we want to be able to create them, and we want to be able to update them. So I'm going to come down here and say list what do we call it? We got create list dialog. So I'll import that component. At the moment, by default, when I generate these files, it's just a big wad of text. So let's control click into here. And you're about to learn some new concepts as well that you might not have learned before, which is using define model to easily keep data in sync. So for this dialog, we want to know whether or not it's visible. Scratch that. The first thing I'm going to do is add here a create dialog. So this is going to be new to you. I'm creating a library called augment Quasar, which is basically a bunch of components that do common patterns that I use in applications so that we don't have to rewrite them over again. So I'm going to import a create dialog from augment Quasar. When you first import from a library, you have to do it manually, but every time I want to import from that library, so for example, a update dialog, okay, it's not working right now, but usually it would then work once you've done at least one import from a library. Okay, so we've got our a create dialog there, save that. If I refresh the page, that doesn't show anymore because it's a dialog. Now check this out. We want a way to know whether or not that dialog for creating is shown. What you might be tempted to do is say const show create dialog is equal to a ref. By the way, you don't have to import ref. They're auto-imported when using the modular Quasar template. False. This would work, by the way. And then you could just say model on that. And then we could say, hey, when the table wants to create something, then we set that equal to true. And it works. There we go. We can do better, though. One of the reasons we split things up into these composables is now I can do Control-Alt-Click on Use List Creator, and I can add that on here, const show dialog. And notice I can call it show dialog rather than show create dialog. I'll show you why in a second. And if I go to list creator dot show dialog dot value, we don't have to say show create dialog because it already knows it's for showing a create dialog because it's got the create, it's on this creator. So because of the context, it knows that this is a show list create dialog. So do you see what I mean? And it also means that we don't have to put that new variable up here. We can just push it aside into this composable. And now we'll do the same thing here. We'll model it there. Refresh the page. And it still works, right? But now we can do something like this. Inside of the creator, we've actually got some callbacks. So we can say on success, I think it's on success. Yeah, there we go. When you successfully, on success, I want you to say show dialog.value is equal to false, right? None of that code ends up inside of the view. All of that code gets pushed aside so we can easily maintain our code without getting without affecting our cognitive capacity, because it's all been pushed to the side and we're not getting overwhelmed by a massive file here for managing lists. It's not unusual for a simple component like this to be over 1,000 lines long. I've seen this in the real world. And it's nothing against, these developers. Maybe they've actually got good reasons, and I'm ignorant to something here. But I have seen a lot of code in the real world where these files just get ridiculously long, and it's not that hard. The solution is simple, maybe not obvious, but simple, that you just put it into its own directory, and now everything has a home. Okay, so now we got our list creator and we can show the dialog. The next thing we want to do, making sure that we're constantly in control here, is be able to work with the form. So I'm going to Control-Alt-Click on that. And this will be something new. Const form is equal to define model. You might not have seen this before. And we're going to pass through to define model the word form. And we're going to say required is equal to true there. This is a view macro. It's only available in view 3.3, I think, was when it was first available, and then it was standardized in view 3.4. So it's no longer experimental. So you can safely write code like this. It's going to work in the future of Vue. Get a yellow squiggly here because it wants to know its type. So we can add these little arrows here and say, this is a form, right? And I can import form from view model. And we pass through to the form. You can think of these little arrow things as parameters for types. So it's like a parameter for typing things. And then we can pass through list there. And there we go. So now our form is typed. And I want to be able to spit out that form. Let's just see if that is working. Okay, so we get a red squiggly here, which is good. It's saying, hey, you haven't given me my form. So now we can say vModel:form. So whenever you use define model, the quote unquote opposite to that, the thing that you use with define model is vModel, and then the name of what your first parameter is for define model. And what this basically means is I want you to model the form. I want you to keep the form in sync with that variable, okay? So what I pass through here is going to be in sync with what's there. Really, really cool, really useful stuff. So now I can pass through here list creator.form.value. And there we go. That's the form we get by default. Pretty simple. It's basically nothing. And now that we've got our create dialog, we can pass the form itself down. So we'll say, what do we call this? We call this a list form. And there we go. We'll get that imported. And I'm going to say vModel on there and send down the form. Some people would call this crop drilling. Some people would call this prop drilling. I am totally fine with 2 or maybe even 3 layers of prop drilling. I don't think it's a problem. If you think this is a problem, then I don't know, maybe you've got a good reason. I mean, what do I know? This is just my experience with web development. I just don't think it's a problem when you're doing some simple prop drilling like this. What some people would suggest is that you use provide and inject. I think that obfuscates things. And I think I've never had a situation where prop drilling in this fashion, where you're going basically 2 layers deep, has created me problems. In fact, I've never had a problem with prop drilling in my life, and maybe it's because of this whole components versus views concept. Okay, I don't need to go into detail about that. If you don't like prop drilling, then you probably don't want to watch my videos, because I do it every now and then. Okay, so we jump into the list form now, and I'm essentially going to grab this code here and do the exact same thing on the list form. But this time, instead of form, we're going to call it, we're going to call this model value. And I like to keep these 2 things the same, the name of the variable and what we pass through there. And again, this is the part that people call prop drilling. We're essentially just now taking, doing the same thing on a form level. Now, last word of this is form. So that should be a q-form. And let's just refresh this and see if that works. We're still getting that object, and that tells me that it's being passed all the way down to this component here. So now I'm just going to go q-input. vModel is equal to model value dot, and we get full typing here, name. So we've got the name of the list showing up there. And I'm always going to make this filled because I just think that style looks nicer. Let's give this a label equal to name. By the way, in the future, I'm going to have ways that we can automatically generate these forms. I'm not far off having that working. The tables and the forms will easily automatically generate. It just doesn't make sense right now. And it's good that you are watching this and kind of understanding how to do it from scratch anyway, because there will be situations where you have to do it from scratch. So now we can easily type in there, and that's being modeled. So that's the form, and we wanted the color in there as well. That's right. What I might do is say class is equal to q-gutter-y medium, and then we'll just say I've got to augment Quasar component for this, which is a color. Bugger, it's not importing properly. Import from augment Quasar a color palette button. So this is just a button that allows you to select a color. And we'll do a model on that, specifically a Quasar color. Dot color. And there we go. Now we can click on this button and select our color. Okay. So here's an important thing to note. Usually you want your styling to be further up the chain. Usually your model components, so in this case, list form is a model component, should not be in charge of styling. Now there is an exception in this case where technically this is a model component, but we're going to add some styling because it's displaying another model component. And so the styling has to come from somewhere. We're just going to wrap this inside of a q-card-section just to kind of pad that out a little bit. Let's just come back in here and put a label on that button. By the way, how do I know what props I can use on this? Because it ends with the word button. So I know this is a Quasar button component under the hood. Because every time I write components, I make sure the last word is the name of the Quasar component. We'll just call that color. There we go. And maybe you can say like the icon is equal to MDI color. Is there an icon for that? MDI color picker? No. Or like drop. Well, it's color helper. Maybe I won't bother with this. Yeah, okay, it's not even worth it. Okay. Let me just get rid of that redundant code now. So now we've got our create list dialog. Another thing to note is we could set the title of this dialog here. So we could say, for example, title, because this a create dialog component allows us to give it a title like create list. All right. However, I would rather do it on the view. And the reason I want to do it on the view is because in different contexts, you might want different titles here. So sometimes you might want to say like, maybe in the future you add some functionality where it's creating a list for a portfolio or creating a list for a project. And in that case, you would say create list for project, right? And it just means that you can do that, whereas you have to do a little bit of extra coding in order to write that, to do something like that if you were to send that prop directly here. All right, so I'll show you later on how you can easily do defaults for things like this, where you get the best of both worlds. But for now, in general, you want the view to be the place where you pass down most of your styling related stuff, or like things that get passed down to the dialog prop. All right, so now what we can do is we can say at, whoops, wrong point. I can say here at create. Okay, because the create list dialog is using a create dialog, and a create dialog has a create event on it. So I can say, hey, when you want to create this, use the list creator to create it. We don't even have to pass through anything there, because what it does is it uses the form that's being modeled here. Now, this is a part that might be difficult to understand, so tune in for a second, because I know I've been talking a lot and teaching a lot in this video. But check this out. The list creator has got a ref on it, okay, which is form. So this list creator composable is the same as the one we're using to call create here. So that form gets passed through to create list dialog. And that gets passed through to create list form. Okay, so here's the chain. And this is the quote unquote prop drilling that people talk about. That form gets sent through to the dialog, and then it gets sent down to the list form, which is here, and then we pick up that value and we model it on the input. Now, this might seem like a lot is going on, okay? But you rarely drill down deeper than this. This is usually as many layers deep as it goes. And I specifically chose this example because this example of having a dialog with a form in it is often as far as you will go, at least in my experience building applications. And the truth of the matter is that these components get bulky. There are always little things that your client wants, these little bits and pieces. And once you have a team of people that can wrap their head around what's happening here, this sort of chain of passing props down, and and the fact that what's being modeled here goes all the way up and ends up being modeled here on the creator. Once you have a team of people that understand that, then it allows you to create code with good architecture. And the reality is you're going to end up having to do something complicated in the future anyway to maintain this complexity. So what I'm trying to do is take a simple example and show you how we can solve this in a way that might seem complex right now, but it gives us a framework, a structure for managing complexity in the future. So when you've got really crazy advanced forms in the future that you have to manually handcraft because there's all these different things and conditions going on, you'll be able to put that logic in the right place. You'll be able to know, oh, it begins in the dialogue, or oh, it begins in the form. And you'll be able to build it without worrying about what happens on the back end, because once you've got all your data shaped, you know that then the view is in charge of sending that data to the back end. All right, so let me just go over this one more time. We're saying v model form, and therefore, because there's string form here and define model, we know that these two variables, the form on the list creator and this form, are going to be in sync. Then list form here is modeling that form on the list form. And so we know that these two are going to be in sync. Therefore, we know that will be in sync with this, which will be in sync with that, which will be in sync with the list creator form. Okay? Again, this is the prop drilling that people don't like, that I think is actually okay, as long as you don't go too many layers deep. Okay, the other thing is it means that this form can very easily move around our application. And I know there's arguments for... Okay, anyway, we won't go into that right now. So now I can model the input here and know that those changes are going to trickle all the way up to the list creator. Okay, the one more other thing I'll quickly point out is one thing that you just have to learn is that the form value here, in order to get typing for that, we can easily just wrap it in this form type. Okay, so that's where we're importing form from view model. We wrap list, which is the thing that it's a form of, and then it automatically types it for us. That's why we're not getting any red squigglies. If I didn't wrap it in form there and I just did it like that, we now get a red squiggly. You need to make sure you wrap it in form because it does basically a bit of type magic to make sure that the typing is right for this. Okay, now that you know all of that, we've got this @create, which then goes into the list creator and then calls create. So calls create on that composable. And then on success, show dialog ends up equaling false, all right, which is being modeled here, and therefore the dialog hides. All right, I promise this is about as complicated it gets in terms of the architecture. I won't lie, sometimes code gets more complicated, that's unavoidable, but in terms of the architecture I teach, everything you've seen in this video so far is just about everything, right? Again, I chose this dialogue example on purpose. Okay, so we come back here. Let's see if it works now. We called it a project, but let's just call this some list. Give it a color, create. And then if I refresh the page, it shows up there. So after creating it, the other thing we'll do, this is good because it gives me an example to show something else. After creating it, we then want to call index again. So what we can do is we can just pass that indexer directly down to use list creator. And then we can say list indexer here is equal to, what's it called? Indexer, use indexer return. And then I can pass through there list. This is how you type it. And you have to say type of list. It's just one of those things that you got to remember. So this is another one of those things that you just have to remember, which is that if I want to pass it down to the use list creator so that I can access that composable, I then need to type it. All right, so accept it as a parameter, and this is how you type the composables. It's also for create. You'd say, for example, use creator return, and you could import that. But we're going to use index or return, and since we've done this step here of typing it, I can now say on success. So when you're done creating that list, I want you to say list indexer dot index, and notice that it's fully typed there, dot, and we get everything that it can do, index, and there we go. So let's refresh this, create another one. It creates it and then refreshes the form. We can easily delete them now. And I'm going to breeze through updating forms because it's very similar to create. All right, so get ready for this. I might even split everything in threes to begin with. So let's say update list dialog, and then I'll go back to the list form. In fact, I don't think we'll even need to change anything on the list form. So we come down here, we create a dialog, which is going to be, I might even just grab the word create there, get rid of the capitals on these two. Control space, get that imported. Instead of list creator, we call it list updater in all of these examples. Now, list updater wants to have a show dialog. So control click, list updater, control click, and then we'll say const show dialog. I might even move it above the updater, is equal to a ref. Remember, we don't have to import refs, false by default. And then on success, I want you to say show dialog.value is equal to false. So I want you to hide it. Return that here. Come back down here. And then on the updater, we've got that model there, so it's lost the red squiggly. Okay, update list dialog. Let's just open to create list dialog. We're basically going to steal all of that code. So wherever it says create, we'll change it to update. There's an update dialog inside of augment Quasar as well. And that gets modeled down. We don't have to do this again because we already built the list form. I think that might be it. Ugh, wow. All right, obviously not, because clicking on that did nothing. List updater dot show dialog dot value. Oh, so the next thing we want to do is say at update, because remember we had that event being emitted on the table. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that list and I'm going to say list updater dot make form. So it's got this really cool function that allows you to make the form using that list. And I think you pass through the list ID. Is that what it wants? Yeah, the ID. And because of that ID problem before, we have to do this cheeky little thing to get TypeScript happy for now. That's something I'll have to fix in the future, but it's really fine to just have to write that code for now. Okay, so when we want to update it, we say list updater, I want you to make me a form, because remember, when you're updating things, your form has to be pre-populated. And I want you to make it using that list ID. And what this does is it checks for that form, it checks for that list in the store. And if it exists in the store, it pulls that list out of the store and uses it to populate the form. Or if it doesn't exist in the form, it fetches the list from the back end. So you can actually await this. I actually should have written it like this. It fetches, so then it would fetch the list from the back end, and then we want to show the dialog. Dot show dialog dot values equal to true. So how simple is that code? We just say, hey, updater, make me the form with that list ID. Whether or not it exists in the store, it's going to work. And then we say, hey, list updater, I want you to show your dialog now. Since that's equal to true, the update dialog now shows, and this form is now populated because make form basically pre-populates that form for us based on the list ID we pass through. Okay, so again, this code is, to me, this is really, really clean code. Look how simple this is. It's just, here's all the shit we need to do the stuff, and then we just pass everything through as props to our components. Now we come back here. update. I'm going to change that to like a red. And there we go. It works. Now, one more thing we can do is we can say, for example, creating is equal to list creator dot creating dot value. And same with updating. List updater dot update. Look at TypeScript giving us a hand there. See how it gives us that red squiggly? Because list updater, of course, should be updating dot value. There we go. Now, one interesting thing to know is updating is actually equal to the ID of the thing that's updating, or false. So that's really cool because sometimes you want to know not only if it is updating, but what's updating. So what I've done is I've just made it so that that variable is equal to the ID of the thing that's updating. All right, so you might even want to coerce that to a Boolean. Okay, so let's come back and let's see if that works this time. List, update. All right, we didn't get that spinner. Ooh. Maybe there's something wrong there. All right, there might be just something that I need to fix. Let's see if it works for creator. Yeah, I'd say I just need to fix that on my end. There might be an augment Quasar bug. But yeah, everything's working. And that's how we architect things using the Blue standard. And in the next video, I might just leave that for tonight because this is a lot of stuff. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can actually create the pros and cons, and we'll deal with relating data and how you can very easily relate data and write very beautiful code that automatically merges the idea of the list into our pro-con. So, you know, when we actually create those, let me just go back to tomorrow. So the idea is on this page, we would pass through the list ID, and whenever we call create for a pro-con, it's automatically going to merge the ID in for us. I'll show you how we can automatically merge it in so that we don't have to pass the ID in our code every single time. They're just like little things like that that are quality of life things that make this code a joy to write. So I hope you all enjoyed this one. I'm really going to try to make the future ones shorter, but this hopefully gives you a good overview. Honestly, if you can understand everything in this video and internalize this, it's just about everything you need to be able to work, to at least begin building apps to the Blue standard, because I've just thrown a crap ton of information at you. Almost swore then. I didn't swear at all in this video, so I figured I could try and get through the whole thing without swearing. So yeah, I will tell you this now. You can go to /register on schema.blue to register an account. I don't know if it's going to work properly, but it will work well enough that you can kind of create it here and then try and log in, and hopefully all of that will work. I might actually have to assign you to orgs now that I think about it. Oh no, you can then create your own org. Yeah, so that's one more thing that I should point out. I'll have to set the redirector on that page. Something else that you can do is create an org. So if once you set it up, you'll have no organizations. So you click on your little icon, you go create org, name your org, and then it shows up in the menu here. All right, there we go. Hope you enjoyed this one. See you in the next video.